from Rescue Academy. I have with us the CEO of the National Registry, Bill Cipher. Bill, thank you for talking to me.
I'm glad to be here and look forward to the conversation.
All right, awesome. So today we're at the EMS Expo in Vegas, and the National Registry is here. What were you guys planning on getting out of the actual expo?
Well, we attend the expo as well as other national conferences, state and local conferences all the time for the simple reason we like to meet the people. I mean, there's people that have questions from EMS clinicians to EMS candidates and students, program directors, educators, medical directors, state officials. So this is a great opportunity for us to reach out and to answer any questions or address any problems or misconceptions that folks might have.
Okay. Have you had any students come up and ask anything about the National, trying to get some test answers?
Not so much, test answers, but there are a lot of questions about, what is the new exam and where can we find more resources out? And I'll tell you, so your listeners and viewers know that you can go to our website at NREMT.org and scroll down to about halfway through under about the examinations. There's a wealth of resources that are there that you can go ahead and access, explaining what the exam is, what the new item types, which your questions are, the distribution of content across the exam. In other words, how many questions are on airway versus trauma, et cetera. Right. And most importantly, there are free sample items that are on there that show the look and feel of the new item types and questions that are on the examination. And there are 15 free items, no cost, for AEMT, and 15 items as well for paramedics. So NREMT.org, about the examinations, scroll down, you can find everything that you want to about the examination, that section.
Perfect. I also saw that you guys started doing like your own little podcasts and stuff, trying to get some more information out there, which is great because anything that you guys provide is awesome for us as not only educators, but also the students taking it to see what the changes. What made you guys pick those type of test questions for the TEIs?
That's an excellent question. In short, we have evolved our assessment process over the last few years to better assess the entry-level competency of candidates. In particular, one piece has emerged as an important element, and that's with clinical judgment. When we did our ALS practice analysis recently and did the addendum to it or amendment to it, what emerged very strongly was the need to focus more on clinical judgment. And so that's where we've said we have to rethink our examination. We also recognize that we were actually assessing clinical judgment in our psychomotor examination with the integrated out of hospital for paramedic. That primarily is focused on leadership, ability to run a call, communication, but most importantly, it focused on clinical judgment. So we rethought our examination. We also looked at what others in the certification industry have been doing with exams. The nursing exam, some other allied health or healthcare boards have evolved the way they think about testing, and they have started to assess clinical judgment differently. We took their lead and we followed that as well and adopted for EMS. So we started writing items and reviewing processes and doing some studies of this back in 2022. So since October of 2022, then after we wrote these items, we started pre-testing these items. So when candidates were taking the live exam, they had these new items in there so we could see how well they perform. It didn't count for or against the candidate, but it did give us an opportunity to go ahead and measure how well they performed. And then we did validity studies. We looked at the reliability and the performance of these items, published some documents, which again are available and linked on our about the examination section of the website. So the reason why we did it is certification industry kind of is going more towards this. Also, the standards for our accrediting body, National Commission on Certifying Agencies, have kind of demanded that we go away from a psychomotor examination, and we've introduced the student minimum competency as well as the new item types. But all of that was under the guise of how can we do our examination better, and following accreditation standards, listening to our stakeholders, and that's kind of how and why we did it.
Okay. So I think we could both agree that when it was a psychomotor exam, there was a lot of subjective reviewing on the student.
Absolutely.
And I can see that that could be problematic. What was the reason, though, to go away from multiple choice questions and like this build list or your drag and drop? Was it to make it harder for people to, I don't want to say mimic the exam, or what was the intent of having those?
So I'll clarify one point. We didn't go away from multiple choice questions.
Right, you still have them.
Yeah, still there. In fact, it's probably a large chunk of the exam.
Are you guys planning on getting away from multiple choice altogether? Or you want to keep multiple choice?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. The reason why we added those additional items that you or item types that you referenced is they're able to more accurately assess the knowledge of the candidate rather than a multiple choice approach. So it gives us the ability to better assess the candidate's performance.
Okay,
that's the main reason. And evidence has shown in the certification industry that there are better ways for doing that, and we've followed the best practices in the testing and certification industry.
Okay, so you mentioned earlier talking about standards. I think one of the hardest things for students to grasp is what is the standard. Now, obviously, just to throw out textbooks, we got Nancy Caroline, Brady, we have all these different publishers, Sanders, and they think that they have the national standard, but as we both know, standards are constantly changing and these books don't constantly change, right? So what would you guys as a national registry tell students, hey, if you're looking for standards, what would you recommend?
Any textbook that's written to the National EMS Education Standards is appropriate. Now, from our perspective, the primary reference point for us is the practice analysis, and the practice analysis is the driving force to help us determine the test specifications, what percentage of questions are on the exam that are airway, cardiology, resuscitation, et cetera. So we use our practice analysis. And the practice analysis is derived from we look at two things: frequency and criticality. How often skills and encounters are, and how critical they are for the EMS clinician. That practice analysis takes us about a year to build, but it gives us that roadmap as to what we need to test. Now, in terms of content validity and how we validate it, we have varying tables of authority that are referenced so that we know where to go to and what to reference on the examination. Certainly, the American Heart Association guidelines, they change frequently. So our examination is updated to reflect the current guidelines.
Question on that before you move on. You say that the American Heart Association does update their standards. What if, or guidelines rather, what if a student is learning 2020 guidelines in their textbook, and then all of a sudden 2025 hits, the new standards get updated? When does a national registry implement those new standards versus waiting until textbooks catch up? Or is the student still going to be answering, or would the national registry put answers on their questions, the old guidelines and the new guidelines, to see?
Yeah, we would never, if there's a significant change, we would never set the students up for confusion and failure. And also we put out there and say these are written to this year's standards, so that way there's absolute clarity as to what the student will be tested or the candidate will receive on the examination. Furthermore, it takes us a while to actually go through our bank. We have tens of thousands of items, and make sure that old referenced items are removed and or updated. If there is a medication that is in vogue now and a year from now is not, we will immediately we'll take immediate action to mask those items and pull them out of the pool. We don't want to set the students up for failure nor for confusion. So if there's controversy with an item, or if there's a significant change, we make sure that we give plenty of notice and make sure that the candidates have full visibility as to what they're tested on.
Another thing, I know previously on the National Registry, you guys were looking for minimum competencies on each section. Is it still the same way?
No.
Like, I figured it changed a little bit. Like, for example, let's say that we have a paramedic student who does very well at EMS, but they're not as versed in ops. And they don't answer the ops questions very well, but they answer all the other questions very well. Will that student still pass?
What we're looking for is entry-level competency that has been established as a standard by our peers in the profession. It's not the National Registry that does it. We bring in peers from EMS clinicians, EMS educators, state officials, medical directors, regular street providers of all sorts, to help set what is the passing standard for minimal entry-level competency. So we're looking at the whole construct of EMS, we're not just looking at airway, we're not just looking at cardiology and resuscitation or trauma, we're looking at all of EMS. And we use an adaptive test for 3 out of our 4 exams: EMR, EMT, and paramedic. AEMT is a linear exam. And with the adaptive examination, the candidate will receive a certain percentage of items from each of the domains that are established through that test specifications and blueprint that I was talking about earlier. So they'll be tested in all the domains, but they do not have to have a passing standard in every single domain. And here's the reason why. EMS operations, as an example, has less than 10% of the items that you'll receive on the examination. The candidate may only receive a handful or less than 10 items. So if you get a handful of items and you miss 3 out of 4, you can still pass the examination, but you may not have demonstrated competency in that specific domain. So we look at the whole construct of EMS, don't look at the individual domains, and the reason why is the number of items are so small. The N is small. It's not fair to judge someone. If we want to judge by domain, the examination will have to be double, if not triple in length. And we don't want that.
No,
it's not necessary.
So I could see now with the new changes, do we see success with it already? Do we have those numbers yet?
The short answer is absolutely.
Okay.
And we launched the exam on July 1st. Of this year, 2024. And what we've seen so far is initially we saw actually a bump in the pass rate for both paramedic and AEMT. But that's a normal phenomenon. It's a selection bias phenomena that others have seen when they've done similar changes. It has since leveled out. And our paramedic right now, as of the time of this filming, is slightly higher than it was last year, this time period. And the AEMT is pretty significantly higher. I don't want to use the word significant. It's considerably higher compared to what it was last year this time period.
So I don't want to take up too much of your time, but we know that different states have different pass rates. And me coming from Florida, we didn't have the National Registry the entire time, right? We started introducing National Registry to paramedics, or requesting or requiring them to have a National Registry only several years ago. What would you recommend to states that are struggling with the National Registry to improve their pass rates? If you were to talk to maybe instructors or schools, is there anything that you would recommend?
The simplest answer, but I'm going to give a little bit more to it. The simplest answer is prepare your students to be entry-level EMTs and paramedics, or AEMTs and EMRs. If you prepare your students to function effectively and safely in the street, they're going to pass the exam. It's not rocket science. It's minimal entry-level competency. But what we're noticing and working with states is there's varying degrees of requirements for education programs for educators. And, a requirement for taking our exam is that you successfully complete a state approved EMS education program. So the states have responsibility to set standards and to review those education programs and make sure that the right curricular content are being educated, that the educators have the fundamentals of adult, learning theory and how to educate. And if those things are done, and if the states have those standards in place, and the educators teach their students to be entry-level, safe and effective clinicians, they're going to pass the exam.